Aloha! Welcome to the Live Ukulele podcast. It is a new year and a new beginning. Thank you for joining me. My name is Brad Bordessa, and in this episode, we're going to talk about some of the things that ukulele players get wrong or don't explore enough or are timid about. Some different things that maybe you could try changing a bit to get more out of your ukulele experience, more enjoyment, more fulfillment, those kinds of things. Since we're just getting started here again with this fourth season, the Live Ukulele podcast is published every first and third Saturdays, except for usually the last couple of months of the year, which has been these past few months. I've just been enjoying some time off, lightening my workload a little bit, not needing to get out a podcast episode every 2 weeks. In this podcast, I just try and share some of my insight on the ukulele and gain insight from other people who I interview to create more of an openness around the instrument so that people don't feel like it needs to be as clinical or as proper, maybe as it is taught by other people. I just really want folks to feel like they can engage with music organically in their own way and not feel like there's pressure to do it a certain way or to be perfect, because really music is just about personal enjoyment unless you really decide to take it to the next level, become a professional musician. I know that most people who play the ukulele aren't going to those extremes, so for most of us it's just about personal enjoyment, and that's what I really try and get across in this podcast, is to give you permission just play music for yourself and don't try and judge it or get crazy about overanalyzing things or being clinical and thinking that it needs to be a very certain way. That's sort of the MO of the Live Ukulele podcast. And if you like it, if you like what you hear, please consider subscribing on your podcast platform of choice. Leave a review, tell your friends, tell your dog. Any kind of word of mouth is helpful, because this really is just a labor of love, the podcast. It's sort of a way to get the Live Ukulele brand out in the world. But more than anything, I just enjoy doing it and hope that it provides some nice insight to folks who maybe wouldn't have gotten this sort of an angle on things anywhere else. I am very excited and a little bit nervous to announce that as you're listening to this, liveukulele.com is now ad-free, or at least like managed ads from a third-party provider. Since pretty much the beginning of Live Ukulele, ad revenue has been a big part of me being able to do this kind of full-time and to pay the bills. But this year, I've decided to pull the plug on that and to pivot everything to just my sales of ebooks and courses, and perhaps direct site sponsorships or podcast sponsorships if opportunities like that arise. But it would be, ukulele stuff. You wouldn't be seeing ads for a Volkswagen or whatever on the site any longer, as long as that works out. I'm hoping that by pivoting and being able to present the site in a cleaner fashion, I can highlight my products and what I offer in a better way, and share the value of what those can bring to people, and to make up the difference in revenue in those ebooks and those courses. So you're going to be hearing more about the products that I release and have released, because these are what are paying the bills at this point. I appreciate your consideration, and if you like what you hear, consider checking out some of my lessons, because I think there's a lot of value there, and what I teach is really what I want to teach. It's not because I think that it's going to make me a buck or whatever. These are really kind of the ideas and the methods that I think are really valuable to people, and that I've been able to workshop over the years, teaching and figuring these things out and finding the best ways to explain them and seeing what is really useful, what is not so useful, what can I leave out. And I think that the products that I create are hopefully valuable to folks. And if you think so as well, I encourage you, check them out or send me an email testimonial that I can use in marketing those kinds of things. So with that said, if you want to check out any of my lessons, please go to liveukulele.com/store. Have a look around. There's some interesting stuff, pretty much something for everybody depending on your skill level. And it's an always growing catalog, and certainly now that the ads are gone, I'm going to be looking into getting more content out on a more regular basis, so there will be more and more options in the future as the library of content grows. So with all that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about some things that ukulele players get wrong. Some ukulele players, not all ukulele players, but some people do these things in a way that maybe I think isn't ideal, and I'd like to share a bit about ways to think about it differently or change your approach to maybe get a little bit more mileage out of what you're doing. The first item kind of goes back to what I was talking about in the intro. That is overthinking things. And this is something that I see a lot. It is very, very common, and it's really a part of Western culture. I talk about this a lot as well, that Western thinkers are taught to think a certain way, and the way that we think is less intuitive. For most people. I mean, everybody's wired a little bit differently, and depending where you're at on the spectrum of right brain, left brain, or however you want to characterize how people think, there's going to be different approaches that work for different people. But a lot of people, especially the people that I end up teaching at workshops and that I really am hands-on with their studies, are folks who, are career professionals. They've got the college degree. They've done well for themselves because they have kind of that overthinking approach to things. Not that that's a bad thing, but just like if you're a lawyer or a teacher or an academic or wherever you fit in that very Western style of going about things, you're going to tend to think about things a lot more stiffly and a lot more, okay, this goes in this column and this goes in this column and this goes in this column. And that doesn't necessarily translate well to music. So the first thing that I would like to encourage you to do, if you feel like you're very timid about just trying things, or that you want to know exactly how something's supposed to go and be able to execute it perfectly because that's how it should go, if you feel kind of uptight in that sense about music, I encourage you to make the effort in your practice and in your playing to go off the beaten path. Take a moment to play something different, intentionally different, or intentionally wrong from what you think it should be. Because a lot of times what somebody's goal is in music or with playing the ukulele is, I want to be able to express myself. I want to be able to just play something beautiful. And that skill in and of itself is never going to come about if you are hesitant about not overthinking something. If you are worried that you always need to play something exactly the right way, or you're convinced that you need to be able to think about exactly everything that's happening, you're going to struggle to find moments where you discover new things on your own intuitively that are really the most important pieces of informing that intuitive style of playing, whether you call it playing by ear or playing by feel, whatever it might be. It's really hard to get that unless you are out in the weeds kind of trying things out, things that might not work. You might crash and burn. It might not sound right. But the great thing about music is that if you play a wrong note, nobody dies. It's not that big of a deal. You just try something different, or you try it in a different way, and you kind of reformulate it until you find something that you like. And then that thing that you like goes in your library of musical ideas, musical things that you can pull out at a later time to just play music. Something that I think is not talked about enough is kind of the Zen moment that musicians find themselves in, where they're really not thinking about music. I find that I play my best when I'm completely tuned out, whether it be kind of a magical moment where I'm like very much within my subconscious and I'm just on autopilot playing the music as I feel it and it's just kind of coming out. It's one of those things, it's like when you're just falling asleep and you start seeing the pictures in front of your eyes, like almost dreams, and then you realize, oh wow, that's a dream coming along. Then you wake up, and it kind of feels like a moment similar to that, where you're playing and you kind of zone out and you go away, and the longer you can pretend to ignore the fact that you realize I'm not actually thinking about what I'm doing, the longer it will go on. And it can kind of be scary, that moment when you realize, wow, I'm not even thinking about what I'm playing. I'm just completely on autopilot. That moment when you realize that is usually where you freeze up and freak out and make a mistake. So for me, one of the best reasons to try and avoid overthinking is because it unlocks this other part of music that a lot of people are never going to get to know or experience because they're thinking about things too critically. And that is just the passive experience of music, where you're just completely on autopilot. And this has a lot to do with practice, which we'll talk about in a bit. But practicing to an extent where you are comfortable with the material allows you to go to this place of not needing to think about things a lot easier. So if you practice your material a lot, you can kind of let go of the reins a little bit more than maybe you think and try and just play it intuitively. You might even find that you don't play it exactly like you think you're supposed to play it, and that the alternative version that comes out is also very nice, is also musical, and because you're not thinking about it actively, it just kind of happens, and it's really a beautiful thing. So when you can, especially in a safe space while you're practicing or whatever, try and make moments where you just kind of play, like look up at the ceiling and just play some stuff. See where your fingers land, see what comes out. And don't be scared if you play something that doesn't sound good immediately. A lot of times mistakes can really turn you off from the idea of just free flowing and improvising. But really, the mistakes are just as important as the good notes that you play, because they teach you just as much about what you want to hear or what you don't want to hear. And if you never play those mistakes, you're going to kind of never know that there is that alternative in there, and you're never going to know why you would only play certain things. And in some cases, you might find that the mistake actually sounds good. I know that a lot of the time, some of the slickest, coolest solos that I play, they come from a mistake. Like I'll grab the wrong note and then, try and massage it in so that it fits, so that it kind of works. And whatever I do to get from the mistake to the right note, or what I think maybe should be the right note, a lot of times that sounds really hip. It sounds really interesting because you're using some chromaticism and you're moving the timing in a way that you maybe didn't intend because you're trying to cover up the mistake or to massage it into something that's a little bit more workable. There's a lot of gold to be mined where you just go for something intuitively. And I think that it would really behoove anybody who is practicing ukulele to take 5 minutes, take a minute, and just diddle, see what comes out. Just try things, try and just, randomly place your fingers on the fretboard. See what it sounds like, see what happens. And as you do it more and more, you're going to get looser and looser, and you're going to kind of understand the moment and like, okay, this time that I'm setting aside here, it's less scary than I thought. I haven't fallen over dead. It's not playing these notes wrong hasn't hurt me in any adverse way. So I can keep going towards that and, lean into it and get used to it and find the musical things that you think are beautiful in that intuitive moment. Because if you want to solo, if you want to play music just off the cuff, free flow, you're not going to get that by critically thinking. There are aspects to it that can help you learn more about what the intuition might do, like listening to a record and learning how to play somebody else's recorded solo note for note. That's useful and a little bit more critical. But when it comes to actually playing something yourself and sort of letting go and just creating something raw, there's really not a lot of room for thinking, okay, if A, then B, or B minus C equals A, or whatever math problem you want to create. There's not a lot of room for that when you're just intuitively playing music and you're trying to free flow. So let go of the reins, throw some notes out there. For as long as you can stand, the more time you spend at it, the more natural and effortless it's going to get. And like the whole point of this is that you're not thinking about it. So don't try and make it be something specific. Just play some notes. Anything. Just, if you want to stop and think about a song that you like, and then take the groove from the song. Not necessarily trying to play the song, but just the groove from the song, because humans understand grooves kind of innately. And dive in and play something along the groove with random notes. Then at least you have one thing that you can kind of lean on. You're not as adrift in kind of the swampy blackness of whatever might be just waiting to come through your ukulele. You can lean on a groove and play some random notes and see what happens. And I think that with those two things, you'll discover things, and hopefully you kind of get a kick out of it. That would be the goal, is to cultivate an enthusiasm for the unknown, so that when you play something weird, instead of like, ew, I'm never going to do that again, try and make it like, oh, well, that was interesting. That was different. Like if it was a taste and you tasted something that tasted like the note sounded, what would the taste be? It's an interesting way to think about it. So yeah, don't overthink things if you want to be able to play freeform, because there needs to be time to take your brain out of the picture and just see what happens. If you're only interested in playing like classical music and, being able to play sonatas or whatever, note for note, up and down the fretboard as fast as possible, then maybe you can just get away with thinking about music critically. But if you want to be able to just kind of improvise beautiful things, you have to do some time just turning off the brain and seeing what comes out. If you struggle with knowing how to get to your next note on the ukulele, how to move fluidly across the fretboard, Left Hand Technique for Ukulele is a video guide to becoming more comfortable with the ukulele. Whether you're a beginner or an advanced player, you'll learn through these 9 hours of HD video lessons how to move across the fretboard, how to play up and down a single string with efficient shifts, how to play from string to string without needing to know theory or interval distances, how to express yourself best using articulations and different ways of dressing up the notes so that they present in a more evocative kind of way. Left Hand Technique is all those things and much more. To learn more, visit liveukulele.com/store. The next thing that ukulele players get wrong sometimes, and this is kind of related to overthinking, is playing with the paper exclusively and convincing yourself that you always need to look at the paper. And now I understand that there are folks out there who do have trouble remembering things, and that the paper is their way to play music at all, because otherwise it just kind of goes out of your head right off the bat, and you just cannot absolutely remember how something is supposed to go. But if you have any little bit of memory beyond that, I would encourage you to also, in addition to just doing some free flow, no thinking playing, take some time to try and learn to play by memory. Because in all of my teaching, there have been very few cases where I've noticed that people played better once I handed them the handout. It's like, okay, we're going to learn this song. Here's the handout. Like, it's all downhill from there because everybody immediately goes and looks at the paper and never looks away from the paper because that is that they think that is the only way that they're possibly going to ever play the song correctly, as opposed to engaging other parts of your brain where you're, watching and copying or listening and copying. Those parts of your brain get turned off when you are only looking at the paper because you're only interpreting through what's written down. And a lot of times, I've tried this several times in my classes, and it's been really interesting where I tell people, it's like, yeah, I have a handout for this, but I'm not going to give it to you yet. Let's see if we can just play it, and I'll teach it to you just like the old school way. Just you watch, I'll explain, and you listen, and you'll figure it out. And we go that route, and then we play through the song, and then I hand out the paper. For the most part, once I hand out the paper, the performance gets worse. People think it's going to help them be better, so they want the paper, but it actually degrades the overall performance of the class when you hand out that paper. Okay, and the reason for this, I think, is because the brain has limited processes that it can execute at any given time, right? They say that there's no such thing as multitasking, that really the brain is just really good at going from one thing to the other and back again very quickly enough that you don't notice that it's not actually multitasking, that the brain is actually hopping between one thing, back and forth very quickly. So when you're looking at the paper, your eyeballs have to read what's on the paper. Then your brain has to interpret it. Okay, that is a number 2. Then it's a number 4. Now my brain has to process what I'm supposed to do with that information. Okay, 2 and 4. That's a finger movement that I need to make. Now my brain needs to tell my fingers play 2 and then 4. So it's this process of thoughts. It's kind of a long breadcrumb trail in order to get from the page to your fingers. There is also that longer process when you, say, watch somebody play something and you try and mimic that on your instrument, because that is also true. That if I am showing you how to play something and you watch and you listen and then you try and play it yourself, there is also an interpretation, but it's a little bit more intuitive because there's more senses that are engaged. You can use your eyes and your ears to learn what's going on. And so you kind of have twice the amount of information to use in order to play the thing back. Whereas if you were to just memorize something, you already have the information in your head. You don't have to read the thing off the paper and interpret what's on the page. You just go directly from 2, 3 in my head, 2, 3, or 2, 4, whatever my example was, 2, 4, and then you just put it in your fingers, and then you play it. This much more direct line to what you want to be able to execute and what you want to be able to play really seems to make quite a big difference in your ability to express and to play something. And I think that this is why why the performance of a class degrades once you hand out the piece of paper. Because everybody goes from thinking about what they're playing and thinking about how they're playing it and listening to how they're playing it to completely erasing all of those experiences that have to do with actually experiencing the music that you're playing, to looking at the page. And that's it. And trying to understand what's on the page. Your ability to look at the page and then hear what you are playing at the same time really kind of goes out the window. And so when you don't have the page and you're able to just play, you're still able to engage with your eyes and your ears and really with your feel too, because you can feel the ukulele vibrating on your body. You're able to engage with the music and react to the music in a much more natural way without the paper between you. So when you have the time and the ability, I always recommend that people try and memorize what they're playing. I know that it's a super long process, and some people have a better head for it than others. Different parts of the song might be challenging for different people. Somebody might be able to pick a picking part, no problem, that's super easy, but they can't remember the lyrics to save their life. Or they can remember the lyrics and how to strum the song, but they can't remember the picking part at all. And that's going to be a case-by-case basis kind of a thing, and it's, for each of us to decide how much effort we want to put into this. But I'm a very firm believer that if you can, memorizing something that you want to be able to play well, and then being able to execute it naturally, organically, so that you can express and experience the expression that you're putting out of the instrument, far surpasses whatever memory aid the paper might lend to the situation. Maybe the paper allows you to play a more intricate arrangement of something that you want to be able to play. But when you play it intuitively, you play it more simply. Almost always I would pick the more simple version that is being engaged with actively by the player, where they're listening to it and reacting to it and adjusting their performance according to what they're hearing. Right? If you're playing off the paper and that's all you're focusing on is just looking at the notes that are written down, when you play something and the tone doesn't match the piece, or you get a buzzing note or whatever, you're only half hearing that. You're not really paying attention to what it actually sounds like, for the most part, in my experience. A lot of people will say, no, I can listen too. But in my experience, for the most part, people really tune out, I think, more than they think they do, which is part of why I think that, making people aware of this is the first step to creating more meaningful music or more expressive music. So memorizing a piece is kind of a big project for most people. It feels very intimidating, and it is, but it's also kind of a muscle memory. Same like playing by ear or playing a certain scale up and down well. It's a practice, and the more you practice memorizing things, the easier it is to memorize more things. And so if you've never memorized anything before, the first time's going to seem stupid hard, and you're going to have a hard time keeping it in your head. But then the further along you get, and if you memorize one song, well, the next song's going to be a little bit easier because you're kind of used to the process. You're used to how your memory works, how you can retrieve that information, what you need to practice in order to be able to put together a cohesive song. And it doesn't need to be complex. A lot of times people feel like, well, I'm working on this right now, so I should memorize this exact thing. That's not necessarily the best approach. Maybe take something that you're very familiar with already that you can play well just because you've already worked on it, and then take that and memorize that and try and play that without looking at the paper. That would be more intuitive to me. If I was the teacher, that's what I would recommend, because then you're not learning something completely new, learning how to physically play it, learning how it goes in your head, and all these other related aspects. You can just take something that is already in your hands, in your head, and just try and transfer the memory aid from the paper directly into your head so that you're just playing straight off of the memory. That's what I would try. And I think that you'll find that you're able to really express the music differently. There's the option to have more nuance in what you play, and the ability to listen really carefully to what you're playing and react will really allow you to hear things. Maybe you realize like, oh, this sounds really flat. Or when I play this note, I'm completely abandoning the note before it, which would add a nice harmony if I was able to continue playing that note. Those little subtle things are very difficult to notice when you're just playing off of the page. So I think that it really brings a lot of depth to your playing if you can get to a point where you memorize a piece that you already know. Keep it simple. Don't go overboard right off the bat. Once you've memorized a couple songs that you already know, then you can maybe think about memorizing new things as you're learning them. Playing less and less from the paper, or trying to play as much as you can from memory before double checking yourself on the paper, those kinds of things. And that all really has to do with the individual. You'll discover what works for you. But try that out and see what kind of music you can create by just listening to yourself and expressing directly. Ukulele chords are a system. To learn them any other way is time-intensive and counterintuitive. Ukulele chord shapes will teach you the method behind finding and locating and creating chord shapes on the ukulele fretboard, including a large library of chord families and chord shapes, along with some of the theory and background you need to understand chords better and to use them on your own out in the wild. To learn more, go to liveukulele.com/store and look for ukulele chord shapes. So number 3 should be kind of short. It's lineage. I feel, as an ukulele player in Hawaii, I feel that it's important for folks, even if you don't live in Hawaii or don't have any interest in playing Hawaiian music, to at least educate yourself about some Hawaiian artists and some of the cultural context of the ukulele. So that when you go out in the world with your ukulele and you play it, even if it's not in a Hawaiian context, you have some understanding of where it came from and what it represents here, if anything. And I understand the desire to elevate the ukulele as an independent instrument, as something that can stand on its own and be taken seriously as a real instrument. Like, I very much understand that. But I don't think that understanding the places that it's been before, especially here in Hawaii and some of the famous Hawaiian players, I don't think that detracts from the want to elevate the ukulele as a real instrument. Because all these guys here in Hawaii, they've always been doing that. They've always been pioneering, trying to bring the instrument up a notch, trying to really make it more than it ever was. And just because of the way of the world and colonization and Western thinking and everything, I think that it's really important to be mindful of where the ukulele came from and its roots. So if you can, look up the history of the ukulele, how the ukulele came to be, but then also, if you have the time and the means, pay attention to what Hawaii was like at that time. You know, read The Queen's Story, or Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, whatever the name of the Queen's book is, and understand some of what it was like at that time period for where the ukulele came about. Because you think, oh, the ukulele is from Hawaii. What do you picture? And I guarantee that for 99% of people, it's nothing like Hawaii actually was at the time that the ukulele came into being. Also, take a little bit of time and see if you can track down some recordings from some of the really old school ukulele players. Certainly like Ernest Ka'ai would have been like some of the very earliest stuff that would have been recorded. But then if you come down the line, look up Ota-san or Eddie Kamai and just listen to how they played and see how far the instrument has come and see if you can hear the influences of those guys in more modern players. Because most of the well-rounded ukulele players here in Hawaii, they're going to have listened to Eddie Kamai or Ota-san and drawn inspiration from those guys and so on down the line. That's how like a musical lineage works, is that that line of inspiration, and everybody who comes next is always building off of what the previous generations have created musically. And so just by knowing what some of those older players sounded like and what they played and what they revolutionized, you could better understand the instrument and the more modern context of the instrument and the more modern players and whatever that means to the music that you play. But I think that lineage is really something that's a little bit overlooked, and especially guys who are out in like Great Britain or wherever, they have their own sort of lineage, but find out how the ukulele ever came to Great Britain. That would be an interesting thing to know. How did it get to you? How did it get to you? All the steps back, all the way down to when the Raven Scrag landed in Honolulu, all those many years ago. That is an interesting thing to know. And I think it brings a richness to maybe not the music, but the understanding of the instrument and the lineage that we all perpetuate. Number 4, things that ukulele players get wrong sometimes, is being exceptionally shy about performing. We live in a time where records are created to be absolutely squeaky clean perfect. Boring, to the point of being boring. If you listen to modern pop radio or whatever, you could make the argument that some of it is very boring because it's so polished. There is not a lot of human error in those recordings because it's just been taken out. It's all digital instruments or auto-tuned voices that are always perfectly in pitch. Whereas if you go back in time and you listen to more raw recordings that didn't have the technology to polish things up, music was a little bit more accessible. If you listen to like a 70s rock album, it might have been that the musicians were maybe young, maybe they hadn't played a whole lot, maybe they just came out of the garage and were making their first record, and you can hear that. And what this discrepancy has done is it's made people feel like when they play their own music that it has to be absolutely perfect. And if you think about it that way, it's kind of depressing because you're never going to want to share your music. Like even me, if I was going for absolute perfection, I would never perform, ever. What you hear on my albums or when I record something for YouTube or play something here on the podcast, if I was going for perfection, you would not hear what you're hearing because what you are hearing is not perfect. And so that is something to try and come to terms with so that you can feel comfortable about sharing music. This is something that I think is a real detriment to Western culture in that music has been otherized. Musicians are sold to us as the only people who can make music, or like if you don't have a record contract, you're not a musician or you can't actually make music that matters. And that's simply not true. If you look to older cultures in the world where there is still singing and dancing and everybody participates in the music, you feel the richness immediately. You feel the happiness. You feel how important that music is to everybody. And it's not just something that you listen to on the radio and you experience as an observer. You experience it as a participant. And so I think that that's part of why the ukulele has been so popular over this past decade, is because people have experienced the community of playing music together in its imperfection. The entire idea of an ukulele club or a jam is not to create perfect music. It's to experience creating music together, right? Completely different things. And so what this musical perfection that we've been sold kind of does to us is it paralyzes us in thinking that what we have to share is never good enough to share. And so I think a lot of people get really nervous about thinking about performing or sharing their music, even for a very small crowd. And granted, I find that small crowds are harder than big crowds, honestly. But the whole idea that, oh, I'm not good enough to perform, or oh, I have terrible stage fright. Like, yes, maybe those things are true, but also I think that what a lot of people don't realize is how much joy their music can bring, even at a raw state, compared to not playing it at all or not sharing it at all, right? If you go to your cousin's house and their child is learning to play piano, wouldn't you rather hear them play something joyfully, even if it's imperfect, and get to experience the music that they can create just right off of the piano, than to not have had that experience? I mean, I think every time, unless you're a real asshole, every time you're going to say, like, yes, of course we would love to hear whatever you have to share. And I think that this is something that we need to remember ourselves. Like if you could say that, like, of course I want to listen to what you have to play, or what you want to play, or what you are thinking about performing. Of course, we would love to experience that with you and to have you share that with us, even if it's not perfect. Think about that when it comes to you sharing with other people. The majority of people out there are going to say the same thing about you. Like, yes, of course we want to hear what you have to share, even if it's not perfect. We know you've been working on this, and it would really bring us joy to hear you share your music. And I think that a lot of times people think that this isn't the case. They think like, oh, they're going to judge me against the radio and expect me, like, it should sound like the radio or whatever. And if somebody judges you in that way, that's a problem that's on them, because obviously it's a different thing. If you were to put Justin Bieber in a room and have him sing a song for you, what do you expect it's going to sound like? It's not going to sound like the radio. It might be nice. He might be able to carry a tune and strum a guitar or whatever, and it would be a nice presentation, but it's not going to sound like the radio, even if it's the same guy, because the records that you hear are highly, highly produced, and they are crafted to that extent of perfection. But really, the joy is the live performance and the sharing of the music. I watch, not a lot, but some NPR Tiny Desk concert. It's one of my favorite ways to watch musical performances, because it's very raw, it's live, it is an honest look at the musician and the songs. It's not a produced performance. It's not a lip sync Super Bowl thing. It's just, the musicians in the room playing the song the best that they can and sharing the song. And you can feel, and that's why concerts are so wonderful and beautiful, is because we get to all experience the music together, even if you are the artist on stage sharing it out, right? And so I see so many ukulele players who are very shy, like, oh, I'm not good enough, or da-da-da-da-da, excuse. And certainly there are people out there who are crippled by stage fright, just paralyzed by fear. And I understand that. If that's you, then maybe performing isn't your thing. But for everybody else, consider how much joy that the music can bring to people. And maybe you have to be selective of your audience. Maybe, there are certain people who won't appreciate what you have to share. But try and find the people who will appreciate that and share with them, because performing is such a fun thing. If you can get a performance in the bag, when you're done, you just feel good for the rest of the day. It's a cheap high. It's such a nice experience because you got to interact with people. You got to share what you've been working so hard on, and it brings people joy. And at the end, you get to feel so successful that you were able to achieve the performance, do the thing, even if it wasn't perfect. You need to appreciate it for what it is. And what it is a moment to share beautiful art. And if anybody wants to judge you for not being perfect, that's a them problem, right? Turn it around, put up the mirror, bounce it back to them, because that's a them problem. If they can't appreciate it, you shouldn't be playing for them anyways. It's not for them to share in. So, perform. This is permission to, go out. Don't be afraid to post up a video or to strum a song for your friends or your family or whatever it might be. And try and change your mindset to realize that music is a special shared thing. It's really a gift that, as a musician, there's a little bit of kuleana, a little bit of responsibility to create music and share it with other people. Certainly, we all get personal enjoyment from playing ukulele, playing for ourselves, but it's important to realize that, for all of the good that music can do, is it right to hang on to it and hide it so it's just for us? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question, but I certainly can encourage each and every one of you to, if it's somewhere on the edge of your comfort zone or within your comfort zone, try it out. It's really scary the first couple of times you perform, but when you do figure it out and you do get it, you play your song all the way through, you succeed, as it were, there's really no feeling like it, and the people around you will feel your joy and appreciate your daring, even, right? Because it's a very bold thing. It's a very vulnerable thing to put yourself out there, especially in this day and age when everything is expected to be perfect. Like everything we say, everything we do, right? Cancel culture and all that. Got to be perfect. So to put yourself out there with something that is so obviously imperfect, that's a gutsy thing. And I think a lot of people respect that more than you might realize as a performer. So try it out. Give it a whirl. What's the worst that's going to happen? Music theory is very important. It helps explain music and helps you understand how it works on the ukulele. But for ukulele, music theory is often overtaught and you get a lot of extra information that you don't need. So I created Street Theory, which is an 80-minute video workshop where I walk you through the most important parts of theory without any of the fluff. In this lesson, you'll learn about the chromatic scale, how to build scales from the chromatic scale, how to identify them in musical situations, how to build chords, how to transpose, and a couple of other things that are immediately useful for ukulele players. You can learn more at liveukulele.com/store. Just look for Street Theory, and I'll see you in the workshop. Okay, here's the final one. The final thing that ukulele players get wrong. You saw this coming a mile away. It is inconsistent practice. Yep, that's it. You know where this is going. Practice is really important for improving. If you want to improve, you need to practice. Period. End of story. That's just the way it is. So, something that I experience a lot as a teacher, and especially going to workshops and seeing the same students year after year after year, is it's kind of a lot of times we see the same people working on the same thing year after year after year. And this is no disrespect to them whatsoever. I know they're enjoying themselves and having a great time. But for those who are out there who really do want to improve, all I can really say is, yes, practice is that important, and consistent practice is that important. If you want to improve, you need to practice consistently. And that doesn't mean you need to practice for 5 hours every single day. You'd get really good really fast if you did practice that much. But for most people, that's not realistic. But if you can practice 10 minutes or 15 minutes every single day, that will serve you well, as opposed to practicing an entire hour or 2 hours on the weekend. Because, as I've said before, if you practice only on the weekend, you have a whole week to forget everything you practiced. And when you come back to practicing, you have to relearn it all again. So you keep relearning the same stuff. You never get to move forwards. Whereas if you practice 10 minutes a day, you don't forget, because it's only yesterday that you worked on whatever it is you're working on. And you can take 30 seconds or a minute to refresh on what you did, and then you can use the next 9 minutes to move forwards and to practice new things, so that you're always building instead of one step forward, one step back, one step forward, one step back, which is really wearisome, I think, for the player, and it's also wearisome for the teacher. If you have a teacher that works with you, keep in mind that they want to see you improve. It's a lot more exciting as a teacher if you watch your students excel, watch them move up through the material that you're giving them, see them succeed and complete tasks and lessons, as opposed to seeing them do the same thing day in and day out. And really, that is the most tiring thing for me personally as a teacher, is, okay, let's try it again this week. Same thing, same thing, different day, different time. Really, practice is the key. So if you haven't already, try and commit some time, even if it's a little bit of time. 5 minutes is better than nothing. Even just picking up the instrument and playing for a couple minutes while you're watching TV or whatever, at least you'll be keeping the feel of the instrument fresh in your hands. You won't be forgetting that. But really, I'll do it later kind of an approach is really not super effective if you want to improve. If you just want to have fun and do your thing, by all means, just pick it up whenever you're inspired, and you can work on stuff and hopefully feel satisfaction for that. But if you actually want to improve in meaningful ways, consistent practice is really the only answer. But you knew all of that. Ha ha ha. I'm just here to remind you of it. That's the show. If you liked what you were listening to, please subscribe, leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Tell your dog, tell your friends. Like I said, any bit of word that you can spread is super appreciated. Help grow this little thing. And if you want to support what I'm doing with the podcast, please go check out liveukulele.com/store and look at some of my lessons. There's something for everybody. You can check it out. I'm working on a new course called Hawaiian Songs for Ukulele. It's pretty much exactly what you would expect. 5 classic Hawaiian songs, and we're going to explore them through picking the melody, strumming the chords, and singing the words with some in-depth look at how to pronounce the Hawaiian and some of the meaning. And then there is a basic solo arrangement approach, and then kind of advanced tips for taking that solo arrangement up a notch. So it's really going to be 5 songs for any level of player. You can jump in wherever you're comfortable, whether it just be picking the melody or strumming the chords, or if you're more advanced, I'm sharing some Hawaiian style solo arrangement tips. And they're 5 awesome songs, kind of like core repertoire, real standard classic kinds of songs. And I'm really having a fun time teaching my way through them, working on that, hopefully going to get them out this first quarter of the year. Stay tuned. Please subscribe to my newsletter. That is the best way, in addition to listening to the podcast, to keep up to date with what I am doing, what is new, what is interesting, and some behind the scenes kinds of things. You can go to liveukulele.com/sign up. Put in your email address, and I will send you 1 email a month, maybe, unless I'm launching a new product, then I send out more. But usually it's just 1, maybe 2 emails a month. I promise I won't sell your information to anywhere. This is a one-man show. I wear all the hats. I own all the information. I don't give it out to anybody else. And I super respect your privacy and appreciate the privilege of sharing with you in such an intimate way as email. So if that is your bag, please go check that out, liveukulele.com/sign up. Completely free, doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get some updates and see what I'm up to and find out about the new lessons that I'm working on, as well as whatever is new with the site or with the podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I will see you in the next episode. Be well out there. And remember, try not to overthink. Try to use the paper less. Pay attention to where the ukulele came from and know some of the old school players. Don't be shy about performing. Remember, music is a gift. Gifts are to be shared. And practice as much as you can manage. Ahui ho. Malamapono. Aloha.